Hey, I'm Brandon Lee and welcome to part 2 of my DJI RS3 gimbal tutorial series where I break down the shots that I did in my DJI RS3 showcase film. That film was made out in the real world, running around with my gimbal in some pretty challenging circumstances, and this tutorial series breaks down how I made those shots with behind the scenes footage as well as in-depth explanation here in the studio. And if you like what you see here, you might want to check out the Gimbal Masterclass, which is a course in my online film school, Unscripted Studio. If you want to learn more about that, just check out the description of this video. There will be a link right there for you to click. So let's break down this scene that I did at Grand Central Station. The person I was filming here is Woo Woman, who does improvised martial arts choreography. And I wanted to do orbits around her to give the audience a sense of being in her private little world inside the chaos of Grand Central Station. The lens I used for these orbit shots was the Viltrox 50mm f1.8. This is a longer focal length, which makes it a lot more challenging to keep the subject properly framed. Framing these shots was difficult, but one thing that made it a bit easier for me was the fact that she stayed perfectly still in one spot. That way I had a consistent target that I could orbit. If she was going all over the place while she did her moves, then there would have been no way that I could have kept her properly framed. So I directed her to stay in one spot and do all her moves without moving her feet. For some of the orbit moves where I wanted a level horizon, I had the gimbal in pan follow mode. PF, that's pan follow, that means that it only follows the pan, it doesn't follow the tilt or the roll. I kept it on either slow or medium speed. So for demonstration purposes, we're going to use this light stand as my subject. What I did was I crouched down like this, holding the briefcase handle in one hand and the gimbal's handle in the other. And then I pointed my feet in the direction I was going to run and the camera off to the side facing my subject. So camera facing the subject, feet facing the direction I'm going to run. And then I just ran around smoothly doing my ninja walk while panning the camera. Now I'm going to demonstrate the wrong way to do this. You don't want to orbit something like this. You also don't want to walk backwards. Basically, if you feel off balance while you're shooting, then your shot will probably be shakier. Quick physics lesson here about orbits. The closer you are to your subject, the faster you'll appear to be moving. When I'm nice and close like this, I don't have to walk all that fast to make it look like the background is spinning quickly behind my subject. But when I'm further away, if I want the same apparent speed of motion, then I need to go a lot faster. So for the shots of Woo Woman, I was practically running because I was very far from her as I was doing my orbit. For some of these shots, I used FPV mode. So the technique was exactly the same. I just had my camera tilted a bit as I orbited around her to give it a more dynamic feeling. For the low angles, I switched my lens and I used the Samyang 18mm f2.8. This is a super lightweight, tiny wide-angle lens. I love using this on a gimbal because it hurts my back a lot less when the gimbal weighs less. I just switched my camera into pan follow mode and I dropped down into inverted mode and I tilted up. There's actually a couple ways you can go inverted on your RS3 gimbal. The easiest way is just to swing it down like that. But if you want stronger stabilization, what you should do is lock off the gimbal by holding the trigger and then swing it like this. This will be a lot more stable, and that's how I got these low angle shots. So I tilted up the camera, then I held it down almost at ground level, and then I just walked forward while twisting my wrist. And I looked in the LCD to make sure that she was framed correctly. In case you're wondering about my focus settings, I did use continuous autofocus and I used zone focus with the zone set to the center of the frame. Next, we're going to talk about this workout scene. Here, I did a lot of similar orbital type of movement to what I did with Woo Woman, with the 50mm lens rotating quickly around the guys as they jumped rope. For these workout shots, I used the Sony 24mm f1.4 GM lens. This lens is great for getting really shallow depth of field while also maintaining a pretty wide field of view. I couldn't really direct these guys because they were doing a real workout, so I just invented camera moves that didn't disrupt them too much. For this shot, as the guy does his kettlebell workout, I put my gimbal in all lock mode. I held the gimbal inverted, and then I just watched as he did his crunches, and I timed my move specifically so that I pulled back right when he was crunching in with the kettlebell so that he comes into the frame at just the right moment. And I set my AF subject shift sensitivity to 1, locked on. This is a Sony a7S III or FX3 feature. Subject shift sensitivity is how quickly the autofocus responds if it detects a new subject in your shot. Does it switch the focus over to the new subject right away, or does it wait for a few seconds before shifting? If you set the sensitivity all the way down to 1, that means that it will lock on your subject and wait for a long time before switching to a new one, even if your subject leaves frame. So for the beginning of this shot, I wanted it to start with the background already out of focus. So I moved close to the guy, but I kept him in frame just a little bit so that the autofocus detected him, and then I pushed forward so he was out of frame, and then I pulled back to bring him back into frame. So it continued to track him with the focus as I moved backwards. For the pull-up shots, I wanted to be at eye level with the guys as they did their pull-ups, so I attached a Monopod Extension to the bottom of the gimbal, just like you see here, and that gave me some extra reach. Monopods are great for adding extra height to your gimbal shots, but what you should be aware of is the further you extend your monopod, the less stable your shot becomes and the more shake you'll get, because basically you have a heavy object at the end of a skinny pole, and that is not a good recipe for stability at all. So when I use a monopod extension, I don't just hold it here at the bottom. I try to keep one hand as high as possible in the monopod to help keep it stable. Also, I try to extend the monopod as little as possible. If I don't need the full extension, then I keep it compacted down a bit more. If the monopod is extended too much behind me, then it could end up hitting another object or a person, and I wouldn't even really realize it as I do my camera move because all my attention is focused here, and then the monopod is just fishtailing behind me. So it's better to keep it retracted a bit so that you don't hit anything. I do recommend using the smallest lens possible when your gimbal's at the end of a monopod because the gimbal will feel heavier the more you extend it. So in this case, for the workout shots, I used my Samyang 18mm f2.8 for the shots where I was extending the monopod the furthest. Thanks for watching part 2 of this tutorial series. There is a part 3, which is in my film school Unscripted Studio. So if you want to find out more about that, click the link in the description of this video and join Unscripted Studio.